Lonely rancher never kissed a woman until a city girl locked the door and said, "Tonight, you're mine." Jake had always lived a life of solitude. The ranch where he was born and raised was his whole world, stretching for miles across rolling hills, open pastures, and wide, endless skies. The land was rich and fertile, but it was also quiet, so quiet that the silence sometimes pressed against him like a weight he couldn't shake. He had never married, never had a girlfriend, and had never even held a woman's hand. People in town sometimes teased him gently, asking why a strong, kind man like him remained alone. But Jake always smiled politely and gave a shrug, saying, "I'm busy with the ranch." And really, he meant it. His life began before the sun rose. Every morning he would step outside his small wooden cabin to see the pale light of dawn spilling over the fields. The smell of fresh hay, the cool morning air, and the soft sounds of his cattle were all he needed to start his day. He fed the animals first, moving from one pen to another, checking each one carefully. He knew every cow, every calf, every horse by name, and they knew him too. They trusted him because he treated them with patience and care. Jake was a man of routine, and he liked it that way. After feeding the animals, he would inspect the fences. Some posts were old and weak, and the wind had a way of knocking them loose, especially during the harsh winters. Jake spent hours hammering, measuring, and repairing, making sure everything was secure. He took pride in knowing that the ranch was his responsibility and that he was capable of keeping it running smoothly. Despite the satisfaction that work gave him, there was a quiet ache inside him. He had friends in town, yes, but he rarely saw them. The nearest town was almost 30 miles away, and visits were reserved for important supplies or emergencies. Most evenings, he sat alone by the fireplace in his cabin, eating a simple meal and listening to the wind whistle outside. He sometimes imagined what it would be like to have someone to talk to, someone to share laughter with, someone who might care about him the way he cared for his animals. But these thoughts were fleeting because Jake had spent so long convincing himself that he didn't need anyone else.
He wasn't shy in a social sense.
When he went to town, he was polite and friendly, chatting with neighbors and helping with small chores if someone asked. Children liked him because he would always take a moment to smile, hand them a treat, or tell a story about the ranch. Adults respected him for his honesty, his strength, and his work ethic. But deep down, Jake felt invisible in a way he didn't know how to explain. He wanted companionship, a warmth that went beyond friendship, but he had never dared to reach for it. Sometimes, during the long, quiet nights, he would sit on his porch and watch the stars. He loved the stars. They seemed so far away, yet so constant. Each twinkle reminded him of the passing years, of the seasons he had spent alone and of dreams he had quietly tucked away. He would imagine a woman sitting beside him, someone who could laugh at his stories, someone who would hold his hand while he pointed out constellations. He never admitted it to anyone, not even to himself, but those moments made him ache with a longing he didn't know how to satisfy. Life on the ranch was not always easy. Storms came suddenly, sometimes tearing through the fields and breaking fences, damaging barns and scaring the animals. Jake learned to handle everything with patience and determination. He would work for hours in pouring rain, soaked to the bone, making sure everything was safe. There was a satisfaction in overcoming challenges, but at the end of the day, when he sat alone by the fire, he would feel a hollow emptiness. The work could fill his days, but it could not fill the quiet inside his heart. He had tried to imagine what it would be like to meet someone from the town, a kind, gentle woman who liked the countryside and could enjoy the simple life of a ranch. But he had never acted on these thoughts. He didn't know how to approach anyone, and the fear of rejection, of breaking the delicate balance of his quiet life, had always stopped him. The truth was, he had never even been kissed. It was a thought that sometimes embarrassed him, even though he tried not to let it show. Jake's solitude was a mix of comfort and pain. He loved the freedom of his life, the ability to wake up each morning without answering to anyone but himself and his animals. Yet he also knew that he was missing something vital, a human connection that would go beyond words, that would touch his soul in a way that work and routine never could. He sometimes wondered if he would ever feel the thrill of someone's hand in his, the warmth of a hug that made him feel safe, or the quiet joy of laughter shared in the stillness of the night. On one particular morning, as the sun rose over the hills, Jake felt the ache more strongly than usual. He had spent the night watching the stars, imagining a life he didn't have, and it had left him restless. He tended to the animals, repaired a broken fence, and carried on with his chores, but his mind kept wandering. He thought about stories he had heard of couples in town, about people finding love in the most unexpected places. He wondered if someone like that could ever come to him, to his remote, quiet life, and bring warmth to the emptiness he had grown accustomed to.
Even in his solitude, Jake had moments of hope.
Sometimes he would picture a city girl, confident and daring, someone completely different from the quiet women in the small town. She would have a laugh that filled the air, a sparkle in her eyes that challenged him, and a heart open to adventure. It was a wild idea, almost impossible in his reality, yet he could not help imagining it. The thought made his chest ache with a mixture of longing and fear, a strange excitement he had never felt before. As the day ended, Jake sat on his porch, wiping sweat from his brow. The sky was painted in oranges and purples, the air was calm, and the world seemed still. He poured himself a cup of coffee, leaned back in his chair, and let the silence wash over him. He was used to it, but tonight, the silence felt heavier, more profound. He realized that while he had built a life of strength and independence, there was a part of him that still longed for more. Someone to share the quiet nights, someone to make his world brighter, someone to finally break the walls he had built around his heart. The night deepened and Jake went inside to his small cabin, the fire crackling softly. He looked at the simple furnishings, the worn wooden floor, and the photos of his family and ranch on the walls. Best. His life was simple, honest, and full of hard work. But it lacked the one thing he secretly desired the most. As he lay down to sleep, he wondered if his life would always be like this, filled with quiet work and loneliness. Or if, someday, someone might arrive unexpectedly, changing everything he had known and awakening feelings he had only dreamed about. For now, though, Jake drifted into sleep, his dreams filled with the stars above and the distant hope of companionship. Whoa. He didn't know when or how it would come, but deep inside, a small spark of anticipation flickered. An instinct, perhaps, that his life was about to change in ways he had never imagined. Jake woke to the sound of rain tapping lightly against the roof of his cabin. The sky was gray and heavy, clouds hanging low over the hills. He yawned, stretched his arms, and stepped outside, expecting another quiet, routine day. But something felt different. There was a tension in the air, a restlessness that he couldn't explain. He was still trying to make sense of it when he heard a faint knock on his cabin door. Jake froze. Visitors at the ranch were rare, almost unheard of, and a knock at this hour was unusual. His hand instinctively went to the door frame as he took a few careful steps toward it. "Who's there?" he called, his voice steady but curious. A cheerful voice answered, slightly breathless from the rain. I hope I'm not disturbing you, but my car broke down nearby and I was told this is the nearest ranch. Could I come in for a little help?" Jake frowned, glancing down the muddy path that led to his cabin. A woman stood there, drenched, her hair clinging to her face, and her coat soaked through. She looked different from anyone he had ever seen. There was something confident about her posture, a boldness in her eyes, and a smile that seemed to challenge the gray skies themselves. He hesitated. Normally, he would be cautious. He had spent years protecting his ranch, his life, and his solitude. But something about her made him lower his defenses, even if only slightly. "All right," he said finally, stepping aside. "Come in before you catch a cold." The woman stepped in, shaking water from her coat and brushing mud from her boots.
"Thank you. I'm Emily,"
she said with a smile. Her accent suggested she came from the city, a place far removed from Jake's quiet countryside. "I didn't expect to end up here in the middle of nowhere." Jake nodded politely. "Dusk. Jake, you're lucky you found the ranch. It's the only place for miles around." Emily glanced around the cabin with interest, taking in the simple furniture, the worn wooden floor, and the photos of Jake's family and the ranch on the walls.
"It's
"Cozy," she said. "Much quieter than the city. I like it." Jake smiled faintly. "It has its charm. Quiet's part of life here. Most people don't mind it." Emily laughed, a light musical sound that echoed through the small cabin. "Quiet's nice sometimes, but I think a little excitement never hurts." She paused, glancing at him. "I hope I'm not bothering you by staying here for a while. The storm looks like it's going to last most of the day." Jake shrugged, though his heart beat a little faster than usual. "It's fine."
You can stay in the guest room. It's small, but dry.
Desperate, as Emily settled in, she began to make herself at home. She took off her wet coat, hung it by the door, and peeked around the kitchen, commenting on the warmth of the fire and the rustic charm of the cabin. Jake watched her with a mixture of fascination and unease. He was not used to having company, especially someone so confident and lively. They ate lunch together, a simple meal of bread, cheese, and soup that Jake had prepared earlier. Emily complimented him, smiling as she tasted each bite.
You really know how to cook," she said. "I'm used to fancy restaurants, but this
This is good. Simple, honest food. Dusk." Jake grunted in acknowledgement.
It's what I know.
But comes from growing up on the ranch.
Emily leaned back in her chair, her eyes sparkling. You've got a good life here, Jake.
Peaceful, honest, grounded.
But don't you ever feel lonely? Jake looked down at his hands, feeling the weight of her words.
He had never admitted it to anyone, not even himself. But yes, he was lonely. Every night spent alone, every quiet evening by the fire reminded him of it. But he didn't want to admit it. "Sometimes," he said finally, "but I've gotten used to it. Life here keeps me busy." Emily tilted her head, studying him with curiosity.
You've never been with someone?
"Never kissed a woman?" Jake blinked, surprised by the directness of the question. He wasn't used to anyone asking such things, and he didn't know how to respond. He could feel a heat rising in his cheeks, a mixture of embarrassment and something else he didn't understand. No," he said finally. "I haven't. Never really had the chance." Emily smiled softly, as if she had expected it. "That's..." breath. Sweet, in a way.
You seem like someone who doesn't rush, who takes his time.
Breaths. "That's rare." The conversation created a strange bond between them. Emily was fearless, bold, and honest, and Jake found himself drawn to her energy. He realized how much he had missed conversation, laughter,
and human connection beyond the occasional friendly talk in town. He was aware of every small detail, how her hair caught the firelight, how her eyes seemed to look right into him, and how her presence made the cabin feel warmer, brighter. As the storm outside intensified, Emily suggested they move to the living room, where the fire blazed in the fireplace. "It's cozier here. We can hear the rain. Watch the fire, it's nice." Jake agreed silently, feeling a tension he didn't quite understand. He had never had anyone this close, and every movement she made seemed to ripple through his thoughts.
He tried to act natural, but he noticed his hands trembling slightly as he passed her a blanket.
Emily settled on the couch, pulling the blanket around her shoulders. "You're very strong, Jake," she said casually. "I can tell from how you work with the ranch, how you carry yourself. There's something steady about you. It's calming." Jake felt his chest tighten. He wasn't used to compliments, especially ones that seemed so personal. "Thanks," he said quietly, looking into the fire. The conversation continued, moving from small talk to stories of their lives. Emily talked about the city, her work, and the people she knew. Jake spoke of the ranch, his childhood, and the animals he loved. For the first time in a long time, he found himself opening up, sharing thoughts and feelings he had buried under years of routine and solitude.
Hours passed quickly.
The storm raged outside, and the cabin felt like a small world apart, a place where time had slowed down. Jake noticed how the firelight reflected in Emily's eyes, how she laughed freely, and how comfortable she seemed despite being wet and tired from her journey. He realized he was captivated, not just by her beauty, but by her confidence, her energy, and the way she seemed to challenge him without even trying. As the night drew on, Emily stood and stretched.
"I should probably get some rest,"
she said, moving toward the guest room. But then she paused, turning back toward him. "Jake, thank you." Breath. You didn't have to take me in like this, and yet, here I am. I feel safe. I feel welcome. That's not something I can say often. Jake nodded, feeling a warmth spread through him. Brits. "It's no problem. You're welcome here." There was a moment of silence, filled only by the soft sound of rain against the roof. Something unspoken hung in the air, a tension, an anticipation, a connection neither of them fully understood yet. Emily's eyes met his, and for a heartbeat, the world outside the cabin seemed to disappear. Then, with a playful grin, she added, "But, maybe you could show me how you keep warm by the fire." She gestured toward the living room, her voice light, teasing, yet carrying a hint of boldness. Breaths. Jake swallowed hard. He wasn't used to this. No woman had ever approached him like this, never teased him, never made him feel both nervous and excited at the same time. He wanted to laugh, to speak, to do something, but he found himself frozen in a mixture of curiosity and fear. Emily stepped closer, her presence magnetic, her confidence unwavering. She looked him straight in the eyes, and Jake realized how unprepared he was for someone like her. He had spent his life alone, guarding his heart and his space, and now here she was, bringing excitement, unpredictability, and a spark he had never felt before. As she moved near the fire, she glanced at him, a soft smile playing on her lips. "You don't have to say anything," she whispered. "Just sit with me." Jake hesitated, then slowly joined her on the couch, feeling the warmth of the fire and the strange, thrilling warmth of her presence. It was a feeling he had never experienced before, a mixture of anticipation, curiosity, and something deeper he could not yet name. The rain continued to fall outside, the fire crackling between them. Inside, a quiet energy began to build, a connection neither of them fully understood. Jake realized that his life, which had been predictable, quiet, and lonely for so long, might be on the verge of change. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in years, he felt a sense of possibility, a small spark of hope, and a quiet thrill that made his heart beat faster than it had in a long time. The fire crackled softly, casting a warm glow across the cabin. Rain continued to drum steadily against the roof, creating a rhythmic backdrop to the quiet room. Jake sat on the couch, feeling the warmth of the fire on his skin, but it was not just the fire making him feel warm. Emily sat across from him, her presence filling the space in a way that made his heart race. He watched her carefully, noticing small details he had never paid attention to before. The way her hair fell over her shoulders, slightly damp from the rain. The spark in her eyes as she spoke, the subtle curve of her lips when she smiled. Jake had never been close to a woman like this, ever had someone so confident, so bold, so alive, sitting so close to him, looking at him as if she could see right into his thoughts. Emily noticed his gaze and laughed softly, teasing. "Jake, are you staring at me or am I imagining things?" Jake's cheeks warmed. Disparably, I'm just noticing things," he said quietly. His voice sounded strange to him, almost foreign, because he had never been in this situation before. The truth was, he had spent years alone, and now someone had come into his life. Someone who made him feel emotions he had buried deep inside. Emily leaned a little closer, her smile playful yet inviting. "Noticing things is okay, but maybe you should say them out loud. Don't be shy. I like hearing what's on your mind." Jake swallowed hard. He wanted to speak, to tell her everything he felt, the loneliness, the longing, the years of quiet evenings spent imagining someone beside him, but the words caught in his throat, breath. Instead, he nodded slowly, letting his gaze meet hers. Emily moved slightly, closing the small distance between them. She reached out, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead, her fingers lingering for a moment. The touch was light, almost gentle, but it sent a shiver through Jake that he couldn't ignore. His heart pounded, his thoughts scattered. He had never felt this way. "Jake," Emily whispered, her voice soft but confident, "you don't have to be afraid." "I'm not here to hurt you. I just want to be close." Part of him wanted to pull away, afraid of the unknown, afraid of losing control over his quiet, orderly life. But another part of him, the part he had never allowed to speak, wanted to reach out, to feel, to experience something real, something human. He realized that he had been waiting for this moment, though he didn't know it. And now, it was here. Emily's hand found his, gently holding it. The touch was electric, sending warmth through his body. Jake felt a strange mix of fear and desire. He had never been close to a woman in this way, had never felt the intimacy of touch, the thrill of connection. His breath quickened, and for a moment he was lost in the sensation of simply holding her hand.
"You don't have to do anything you're not ready for," Emily said softly, sensing his hesitation.
Just let yourself feel. That's all I ask. Jake nodded, his throat tight. He had spent so long building walls around himself, convincing himself that he didn't need anyone. But now, in this small, warm cabin with the rain outside and the fire between them, he felt those walls beginning to crumble. He realized that desire, connection, and intimacy were not weaknesses. They were parts of life he had been missing. Emily leaned even closer, her face just inches from his. "Jake," she whispered, "I want you to know, I'm here because I like you. I'm here because I see you. And tonight, Tonight.
I want us to be close.
Jake's heart pounded in his chest. The words were simple, but they carried a weight he had never imagined. He had never been desired, never been seen in this way. Emily's eyes held a promise, a daring invitation that made him feel alive in a way he had not felt in years. She reached out and gently cupped his face, her thumb brushing lightly across his cheek. The gesture was intimate, tender, yet bold. Jake's breath caught, and for a moment he was frozen, caught between fear and longing. He had never been kissed. Never. And now, here was Emily, offering him something he had only dreamed of. Emily tilted her head slightly, her lips just a breath away from his. "Tonight, Jake, you're mine," she whispered, a soft, confident declaration that left no room for doubt. Jake's mind raced. Part of him wanted to pull back, to retreat into the safety of his solitude. But another part, the part that had been aching for connection all his life, leaned in instinctively, irresistibly. He closed the small distance between them, and their lips met in a tentative, gentle kiss.
The first contact was light, uncertain, a delicate exploration. Jake felt a rush of emotion, fear, excitement, desire, all mingling into a powerful, overwhelming sensation.
Emily's lips were warm, soft, and insistent, guiding him, encouraging him, showing him that intimacy could be gentle, kind, and thrilling all at once. He responded slowly at first, unsure of the rhythm, unsure of how to move, how to feel. But Emily's presence was calming, her confidence giving him courage. Gradually, he allowed himself to melt into the moment, letting go of years of hesitation and fear. The kiss deepened, becoming more passionate, more intimate, as Jake realized that he had never felt anything like this before. Time seemed to stretch and bend around them. The storm outside became distant noise, the firelight flickered and danced, and all that mattered was the connection between them. Jake's hands trembled slightly as they rested on Emily's waist, learning the contours of her body, learning the language of touch. Emily's hands moved over his shoulders, his chest, reassuring, guiding, and celebrating the newness of their connection. After what felt like both an eternity and a fleeting moment, they slowly pulled back, their foreheads resting together, breathing heavily, eyes locked. Jake's mind was spinning, his heart racing, yet there was a peace he had never known. He had crossed a boundary he had always feared, and yet it felt right, natural, and beautiful. Her fingers tracing patterns on his arm. "You did wonderfully," she whispered, her voice gentle, affectionate.
See? It's not so scary.
"Feeling something, it's a gift, Jake. And you deserved it." Jake felt a lump in his throat. He wanted to speak, to tell her how he felt, but the words failed him. Instead, he simply nodded, letting the silence speak for him. Pride. He had been lonely, isolated, and afraid for so long. And now, in one night, someone had seen him, wanted him, touched him in a way that made his entire world shift. They sat together in the firelight, wrapped in a comfortable silence, hands entwined, hearts beating in a shared rhythm. Jake felt emotions he had never allowed himself to feel. Longing, desire, excitement, and above all, connection. He realized that intimacy was not something to fear. It was something to embrace, something that could awaken a part of him he had forgotten even existed. As the night deepened, Emily rested her head on his shoulder. Jake wrapped his arm around her, holding her close, feeling the warmth of her body against his. For the first time in years, he felt truly alive, fully present, and profoundly seen. The storm outside continued, but inside, the cabin was filled with a different kind of warmth, a human warmth, a connection that words could not capture. Jake realized that life had changed. The walls he had built around his heart were no longer impenetrable. Emily had come into his life, bold and fearless, and shown him that love, desire, and intimacy were not things to be afraid of. They were gifts, waiting to be experienced, waiting to bring color and passion into a life that had long been quiet and predictable. And as he held her close, feeling the rhythm of her breathing, he knew one thing with absolute clarity: his life would never be the same again. Emily had unlocked a part of him he had never known, a part that had been waiting for someone just like her. Tonight had changed everything, and Jake, the lonely rancher who had never kissed a woman, had finally discovered the thrill, the joy and the vulnerability of intimacy. The first rays of sunlight peeked over the hills, casting a golden glow across the ranch. The storm had passed, leaving the earth damp and fragrant, the grass sparkling with drops of rain. Inside the cabin, Jake stirred awake, feeling the warmth of another body beside him. For a moment he lay still, listening to her soft breathing, feeling the steady rhythm of her heart. Emily had fallen asleep on the couch the night before, her head resting on his shoulder, and he hadn't moved, afraid to disturb the peace they had created. Jake's mind raced with memories of the previous night, the fire, the storm outside, the first kiss, and the way Emily had drawn him out of his shell. He had spent years living a quiet, isolated life, and yet in a single evening, someone had entered his world and shaken it completely.
He felt a mixture of awe, gratitude, and a thrill he had never known before.
Rest. He looked at her sleeping face, her hair falling gently across her cheeks, and realized that he no longer wanted to be alone. For the first time, he felt that longing he had carried silently for years could be fulfilled. Emily was not just a visitor. She had become a presence he could not ignore, a part of his life he wanted to hold on to. Emily stirred, opening her eyes slowly. Inspiration. She blinked a few times, adjusting to the soft morning light. When she saw Jake watching her, she smiled, a warm, tender smile that made his heart skip a beat. "Good morning," she whispered, her voice still soft with sleep. Jake returned the smile, a little shyly. "Good morning," he said. He felt a strange mixture of nervousness and joy, emotions he had never experienced before. "But did you sleep well?"
Emily stretched and yawned, then laughed softly. I did.
"Better than I expected, actually. Better than I expected. Actually, it's peaceful here. You made me feel safe." But Jake felt a lump in his throat. He had never been told anything like that. "I'm glad," he said quietly. I'm glad you're here."
They shared a quiet breakfast together, the sun now shining through the windows, illuminating the cabin and casting a warm light over everything.
Emily laughed at the small details of ranch life, the way the coffee tasted strong and simple, the way Jake moved around the cabin with purpose and care, and the way he seemed completely at ease in his element.
You're very good at this, Emily said, sipping her coffee.
"I don't know if I could manage a ranch. It's hard work." Breath. Jake smiled faintly. "It's what I know. It's what I love. But it is hard work. Yes."
Every day is a challenge. Emily reached out, taking his hand across the table.
"And yet, you make it look easy. There's a quiet strength in you, Jake." "I admire that."
He felt a warmth spread through him at her words.
Draven had ever spoken to him like this before, with such sincerity and admiration. He realized that her presence had opened a part of him that had long been closed, a part that craved connection, encouragement, and understanding.
After breakfast, they stepped outside to survey the ranch. The rain had left everything fresh and vibrant.
The fields shimmered with dew, the animals were calm, and the air was filled with the clean scent of earth and grass. Jake showed Emily the barns, the pastures, and the wide open spaces he had tended for years. She listened attentively, asking questions, showing genuine interest, and laughing at the small stories he shared about the animals and the land.
You really love this place, Emily said, her eyes wide as she took in the scenery.
I can see why. It's beautiful, and it's yours.
You've built something amazing here. Jake nodded, feeling pride mixed with humility. It's not perfect, but it's mine. It's all I've ever known. Emily smiled, stepping closer to him. And now, it could be ours if you want it to be. You don't have to be alone anymore. Jake's heart raced. Break. Her words, soft but firm, stirred something deep inside him. He realized that he didn't want to go back to the life of quiet solitude, round and desperate. He wanted someone to share it with, someone to laugh with, someone to be by his side through storms and sunshine alike. He looked into Emily's eyes and saw the same spark he had felt the night before, a connection, a promise, a possibility. They spent the day working together on the ranch. Emily learned quickly, her city hands, clumsy at first but determined, frowned. She helped mend fences, feed the animals, and even ride one of the horses with Jake guiding her. Laughter echoed across the fields as she struggled to stay balanced, and Jake found himself smiling more freely than he had in years. Her energy and enthusiasm were infectious, and he realized that life with her could be vibrant, joyful, and full of surprises. By evening, they returned to the cabin, both tired but exhilarated. Emily leaned against him as they walked inside, and Jake felt the steady warmth of her presence. He had never imagined that someone could come into his life and change it so completely, yet here she was, bold, fearless, and utterly captivating. They prepared dinner together, their movements natural, comfortable, and unspoken. There was a rhythm to their interaction, a silent understanding that had begun the night before and was now growing stronger. They laughed over small mistakes, shared stories, and felt the quiet thrill of being together in a space that was theirs alone. After dinner, they sat by the fire once more, watching the flames flicker and listening to the soft sounds of the evening. Grasp. Jake realized how much he had missed moments like this, moments of warmth, companionship, and shared experience. Emily leaned her head on his shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her, feeling a sense of peace he had never known.
You've changed my life, Jake, Emily said softly. Being here. With you.
It feels right. I don't know why, but it does. I feel like I belong here, with you, on this ranch, in this life. Breaking. Jake felt a lump in his throat. He had spent years believing he was destined to be alone, that his life would always be quiet and predictable. Breath. And yet, here was Emily, making him feel seen, desired, and alive. I feel the same. Breaths. I never thought I could feel like this, but I do. I feel happy. I feel alive. They spent the night talking, sharing dreams, fears, and hopes for the future. Emily spoke of her life in the city, the work she loved, and the people she cared about. Jake spoke of his family, the ranch, and the years he had spent alone. They listened to each other, understanding that this connection was rare, precious, and worth nurturing. As the fire burned low, Emily rested her head on Jake's shoulder once more. I think we could be happy here, she whispered. Jake nodded, feeling a sense of certainty he had never experienced before.
Yes, I think we could.
Together.
The days that followed were filled with new routines and shared experiences.
Emily learned the rhythms of ranch life, and Jake began to see the world through her eyes. Vibrant, exciting, and full of possibilities. They worked together, laughed together, and slowly, naturally built a life that neither had expected but both had secretly longed for. Around. In despair, A.G. realized that his life had been missing something all along. Not the work, not the solitude, but human connection, love, and companionship. Emily had come into his world and shown him that life could be both simple and extraordinary, quiet and full of joy, structured and yet full of surprises. They spent evenings by the fire, mornings watching the sunrise, and days tending to the ranch side by side. Jake felt a sense of fulfillment he had never known, a contentment rooted not just in his work, but in the presence of someone who cared for him, challenged him, and made him feel alive.
For the first time in his life, Jake felt complete.
The ranch was no longer just a place of work and solitude. It was a home filled with laughter, warmth, and love. Emily had changed everything, not by force or demand, but by simply being herself, by being bold enough to enter his life and gentle enough to care for his heart. As they stood together on the porch one evening, watching the sun dip below the hills, Jake realized that his life had transformed in ways he had never imagined. He had gone from being a lonely rancher, isolated and reserved, to a man who felt love, connection, and hope. Emily's presence had unlocked a part of him that had long been hidden, and he knew that together they could face any challenge, enjoy every joy, and build a life full of warmth and meaning. He took her hand in his, holding it tightly.
"Thank you for coming into my life," he said quietly. Emily smiled, her eyes shining.
"No, Jake. Thank you.
You've shown me a world I never knew, and a heart I never imagined. I'm glad I stayed. I'm glad I'm here, and I'm glad it's with you."
They stood together in silence, the wind whispering through the fields, the stars beginning to appear above, and the world feeling right. Jake had found love, companionship, and a new beginning, and he knew that life, once quiet and lonely, would never be the same again. For the first time, Jake felt truly alive, not just surviving on the ranch, but living, loving, and sharing a life that was richer, fuller, and brighter than he had ever imagined.
And as he held Emily close, he realized that the lonely rancher who had never kissed a woman had finally found the warmth, connection, and happiness he had longed for all his life.